Welcome to Finding Contentment, the official podcast of the American Institute of Stress. The goal of this podcast is to explore the science, psychology, and practical wisdom that can help us manage our stress. If you are looking for personal growth and professional success, or just want a more fulfilling life, visit us at stress.org. And now here is the host and executive director of the American Institute of Stress, Will Heckman.
Hey, greetings, everyone. Welcome back to Finding Contentment. I'm your host and executive director for the American Institute of Stress. It's Will Heckman. Thank you again for joining us. I would like to ask those of you who are listening to the podcast, make sure you go to stress.org. And while you're there, you might want to subscribe to our magazines. Make sure you check out all the information about stress-related issues. And if you're watching us, please make sure to hit the like button. Please subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. All right, so today we're going to be talking about the mental health and brain-body connection with Dr. Andrew Pleener and how life's stressful events impact us and the potential consequences if they're left unaddressed. Dr. Pleener is a board-certified integrative psychiatrist and co-founder of the hashtag Same Here and Star Alliances, both leading a global mental health movement and integrative mental health. And through the Same Here Global, he partners with prominent organizations, I'm proud to say we're one of them, the American Institute of Stress, to raise awareness about the physical impacts of life events on mental health and promote proactive measures for psychological resilience. And as program director for MUIH's STAR certification program, he oversees a comprehensive education initiative exploring the intersection of mental and physical health and the science behind self-help and healing modalities. And Dr. Pleener is co-founder of 5 in 5 Incorporated, which is a mental health consulting and digital therapeutic firm, and is a very sought-after speaker on the brain-body connection at mental health summits and podcasts and corporate events. He's also founder of Regional Psychiatry, a telehealth company providing virtual integrative mental health services across Florida, Maryland, and Colorado. And you'll correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew. He's Regional Psychiatry's team of integrative psychiatrists and psychologists and therapists and STAR coaches, and they deliver STAR exercises, which is a comprehensive approach to care that integrates mind-body exercises and psychotherapies promoting holistic wellness and optimal mental health. So please join me in welcoming our guest, Dr. Andrew Pleener. Hi, Andrew. Thanks for joining us, man. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me, William. I appreciate the introduction. I truly champion the work of your organization, and I'm excited to have this conversation with you today.
You know, I just, before we get started, I want to tell you, by the way, if you're listening to this and you go to stress.org, you'll see a webinar that Andrew did not too long ago. It was awesome. So if you get the chance, if you're a member, you can see it for free amongst the other member benefits. But if not, you can still buy it and watch it and share it. So I wanted to ask you, you know, you've done a lot of things, and I asked this about a lot of people that come on this show, but what exactly inspired you to go into psychiatry? It's not an easy field. It takes a lot more study than people think. So what was your journey there?
It's a good question. My inspiration to get into this space, it actually came about from personal experience. My father was a functional family medicine doctor with a lot of emphasis on lifestyle, diet, nutrition. He practiced back in the 80s when that was really looked at as, you know, a quackery type of a field. And people would eat whatever they wanted. People would get this thing called weight gain that would start to develop. And along the way, their blood pressure would go up, their sugar would go up, their cholesterol would go up, their sleep apnea would start to develop from weight gain and poor metabolics. Depressive symptoms would start to rise. And he would always point out that, you know, they would be on numerous different medications just to target those symptoms. So they'd be put on a metformin for the sugar, a statin for the cholesterol. Maybe today a lot of people are on CPAP devices for sleep apnea. And he would always say, but is anybody actually helping to coach the nutrition and the lifestyle to get the weight loss, to improve the metabolics? And growing up and going into his office and shadowing, I would see that as people would actually come down on their weight, not only would they be able to lower the medical medications, but a lot of their psychiatric medications would go down as well. Anxiety would improve, depression would change. It always made me wonder, what is the connection between metabolics and the way we think, feel, function, and perform? A few years later, took a trip to Africa with my family, and on that trip, upon return, my mother got a parasitic infection and got very sick. Got it treated, and then over the next 2 years, she subsequently developed malaise, fatigue, bloating, brain fog, lost a lot of weight. We had every single medical workup that you could possibly think of, from labs, ultrasounds, CTs, colonoscopies, stool cultures. Everything was coming back normal. And eventually she was diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome and depression. Tried different combinations of treatments, nothing worked, and finally got in touch with the African consulate. They put her in touch with, at the time, his name was Kevin Cahill, who ran the UN's tropical medicine program, and he found that she had another parasitic infection. And upon treatment of that, all of those symptoms would start to go away. So again, what is this connection between malabsorptions and metabolics and the way we think, feel, function, perform? And I ended up going into the track of medicine, wanting to learn about those things. And then it was just inevitable that I would start to look at the other side of the coin, not just how the body is affecting the brain, but how does challenging life events and the stress that comes from that, how does that disrupt psychological processes that over the course of time impact our metabolics? And that led me on the path of psychiatry.
It's funny because I wanted to ask you specifically about that. You tell a common story that a lot of people that go into psychiatry and psychology and mental health field do it because of personal stories. But I did want to ask you, and it's funny that you talk about that, I wanted to know about the impact, the way you view how our current system, teaches us to treat patients. You're a young guy. You've been to, you're talking about the 80s. Well, I was one of those guys in the 80s, eating whatever the hell I wanted to. I've learned since then. But I wanted to know the difference between the current system, how it teaches us to treat patients' mental health, and today. Do you think the way we face those challenges have changed?
Prior,
is changing?
it's definitely changing. There is a paradigm shift in the way we're looking at mental health, similar to the way there was a paradigm shift in physical health. If you look at physical health 30, 40 years ago, the gym was just a place for professional bodybuilders and athletes, and
Right.
would eat whatever they wanted, and this thing called plaque would start to accumulate in the arteries, and weight gain would develop, and people just assumed that it was poor genetics. They never really thought about the accumulation of that sedentary lifestyle and poor diet. And then eventually they would develop symptoms and were trained to recognize those symptoms. They would see a doctor and get diagnosed with a physical illness. Maybe it was a heart condition, a stroke, high sugar. And there's been a paradigm change where now we learn the science behind what we put into our body and what sedentary lifestyle does towards weight gain and insulin resistance and arthritis in the knees and sugar accumulating in the circulatory system that push us towards the development of the illness. Prior to the experience with my family, I looked at mental health in that similar lens of, this is just a genetic thing that you're born with. It's going to happen to some, it's not going to happen to others. And through that event and through the research that I ended up conducting, after that and my whole quest in mind-body medicine, started to really realize that that is not the way mental health is. Just like we know now, physical health is not a binary topic of illness versus perfectly normal. It's a continuum that we're all a part of. Similarly, mental health is also a continuum. And we need to start to learn about the impacts that breakups, divorces, job losses, sickness of loved ones, how do these things, similar to the way plaque starts to slowly accumulate in the arteries, how does that lead to hormonal imbalances, inflammation in the cells, disruptive digestive rhythms, circadian rhythms that impact metabolics and malabsorptions, pushing us to less optimal states, and then eventually these manifestations of the illness itself. So the takeaway is that started to realize that the disorders that we tend to focus on are really not the problem. They're the manifestations. And there's a lot of imaging that's actually showing now how neural circuits are impacted over time and how we should be learning about proactive exercises. We call it a gym for the brain, to optimize these circuits on a proactive level, whether we're at an illness or whether it's brain fog, malaise, lack of clarity of thoughts, to double faulting on a tennis court.
You're right. I mean, I was an athlete, for better, a competitive athlete from my younger days. And people used to ask me about, just go to work out. I said, if you just go to work out, just to work out, it's really not going to work. It's got to be your lifestyle. You have to work. Like I would tell them, you know what, get interested in a sport and work out to get better at the sport. Because physically and mentally and emotionally, it makes you feel so much better. And I think more and more people are starting to get on board with that kind of thinking. And you're right. It is changing. I know one of the ingredients you said to do away with is sugar intake. And I just recently went through that, where I did something called the Whole30, and I eliminated sugar. What a significant difference it made in the way I felt every day. My knees stopped hurting, my shoulders stopped hurting. For a guy my age to say that says something. So you're right. We're learning a lot more thanks to guys like you who are saying, hey, well, change your diet, do more things. I also wanted to ask you, I mentioned that you are the founder and director of #SameHere and the Star Alliances, which is a great support system for people with mental health. I had the pleasure of speaking with Eric Kusin on one of these podcasts. And how did those organizations get started? You guys are doing such great work. I think people need to know what they're about and how to find them.
No, thank you. It came about from seeing that there was a problem in the way we're approaching mental health. I mean, when you start to think about the physical health model, we're not just sitting around waiting until we develop an illness before we react. We're learning the science of how the things we put into our body push us towards an illness. We all realize that we have physical health. We're trying to be preventative. There's gyms on every single corner. You have all this different information about what to do in a gym. It's not singular. We would never just do the treadmill machine and nothing else for the rest of our life. And then when you think about the mental health model, we're not really understanding what mental health is. We're not learning the science the same way that we are with physical health, how stress and trauma is pushing us towards the development of less optimal states. We're not learning options to actually work on ourselves on a day-to-day basis. We call it a gym for the brain, just like there's biceps, triceps, ellipticals, treadmills. We're not learning about TRE and breath work and havening and tapping and alpha stim and neurofeedback and brain spotting, ACT therapy. And then what are these things actually doing to optimize neural circuits? So our mission through SameHere is to show that just like we all have physical health, because we all from time to time have poor diet and poor lifestyle and live sedentary lives from time to time, we all have mental health because we all go through challenging life events, and the stress from that actually impact us. The founder of the organization started it from a lived experience where he had a brother that had gone through cancer from the time he was a child. And he never thought that that was actually impacting him. It was his brother that was going through the challenges. He's perfectly fine and okay and normal because he's doing well in school. He's a great athlete. He got into an Ivy League college. He got his dream job as a sports exec with the Florida Panthers organization. And then all of a sudden, one day, he finds himself having a mental health crash. Couldn't remember the middle names of his siblings, couldn't articulate sentences, had no original thoughts. And it only came years later when he started learning about integrative mental health and mind-body science that he realized the impacts that his brother's challenge was having on the development of him moving towards disorder. If he would have known about that earlier on in life, he would have been working on his mental health proactively every single day. So the organization really came about with a mission to show, let's not focus on our labels. Let's not talk about major depressive disorder, PTSD, OCD. Let's start opening up what we call same here stories. And our logo is the ASL sign for same here. Thumb to the chest, pinky pointing out. Let's start talking about the challenges we go through. Losing a child to SIDS, being 11-0 in boxing, getting knocked out for the very first time, being in a terrible breakup, having a loss of a loved one or a sickness of a loved one. And if we could all start sharing, celebrities, entertainers, everyday people, doctors, different advocates around the world, we could really start to show that this is not a topic for a few people, it's a topic for us all. So with Eric, when he started to have his symptoms of the mental health crash, they started to treat him with many different medications over the course of 2.5 years. And nothing was really getting his cognitive capabilities to come all the way back. And eventually he got connected with an integrative mental health specialist that started to teach him the science of all these different modalities that exist beyond simply medication, and started teaching the science behind what his brother was actually going through, how that was actually leading to physical impacts and changes in the nervous system. And he started to learn about what breathing does on the vagus nerve, what tapping does on meridian points, what havening does on dampening the amygdala, and so many other modalities beyond that to actually heal. He started to feel better, and then realized that if he would have known that even watching somebody else go through a challenge in their life is causing changes to the nervous system, he would have been proactively working on himself every single day, just like we all work on our bodies every day. If we've got push-ups, sit-ups, jump rope for heart health, he would have been doing tapping and breathing and havening for mental fitness. So the mission of our organization is to show that, let's not just wait for everything to build up before we react. Let's all share what we call a same here story and show that we all go through things in life. Our logo is the ASL sign for same here. It's thumb to the chest, pinky pointing out. And let's not emphasize the labels. Let's emphasize the lived experiences. Losing a child to SIDS, being 11-0 in boxing, getting knocked out for the very first time, having a loss of a loved one, a sickness of a loved one. And if we can get celebrities, entertainers, influencers, everyday people to open up, we could change the narrative instead of waiting to develop an illness. Realize that this is something that we all have. Mental health's a continuum. We're on that continuum. What we go through in our life is pushing us towards us optimal states. We could start to learn the gym for the brain, so we can, optimize the way we're feeling proactively, just like we do with our bodies every day with physical health.
I tell you what, your message is getting out there, Chris. Excuse me. I see it more and more, and I see the kinds of things that you guys are doing, making a difference, because I think you're right. I think when people understand that, first of all, you're not in this alone, that there are a lot of people who have shared experiences and that they can affect us in ways that we don't realize. Not everybody listening or watching this is a mental health expert. And I don't expect you to be. Nobody expects you to be. If you broke a bone, you'd go to a doctor. I think the big difference is that when we have a mental health issue, especially stress, which can lead to diagnosable problems, you tend to just shrug it off.
Right.
And Erica's the classic story. When I spoke to him, I was, astounded. He told me he woke up one day, couldn't speak. Basically could not talk. And that was the guy did it for a job, and he does it really well. He does it really well now, as you do. And so it has such an impact. These traumas, these stressful events in our lives, that we have to start realizing that there is that mind-body connection that you guys talk about. And I also wanted to ask you the difference today, that somebody listening, the difference between going that normal route, doing talk therapy, or going to certain psychiatrists or doctors that are going to prescribe medicine, and going through the integrative mental health practitioner route. What is the big difference they're going to see?
The classical model today, and I think overall as a field, mental health in general is shifting towards an integrative approach. But it's not just looking at how to recognize cluster of symptoms and categorizing those symptoms into a label of a disorder. If you have 5 out of 9 symptoms on the DSM-5 checklist, you meet this criteria for major depressive disorder. If you have 4 out of 9, what category does that put you in? The integrative model is more looking at how lived experiences are actually leading towards hormonal imbalances, inflammation in the body, malabsorptions. The gut microbiome is a big one, and how all of this is affecting the way we think, feel, and function. On the flip side, what about lifestyle? What about too much isolation, not getting enough sunlight? What about eating food with preservatives? Not getting enough minerals and vitamins. It's looking into all the different approaches, and then what else exists beyond medication? What is the role of medication? What is the role of botanicals and supplements? What are the roles of different types of therapies? What does a breathing exercise do in the nervous system? How is that different from trauma therapy versus traditional talk therapy? What's the difference between EMDR and brain spotting? What about interventional techniques and medical devices? And it's about incorporating different types of modalities to get somebody more optimal rather than the one size fits all. It would be like going to a gym and only doing tricep machine every single day and nothing else. You get some value out of it, but what if that's not enough for me? And what happens if I get bored of doing the tricep machine? I might prefer push-ups, you might prefer bench press, but if I get bored of push-ups, what else can I do? And if I don't have options, and if I'm not learning the science behind what those options are actually doing, and I'm not feeling well, and my nervous system is a little bit dysregulated, instinctively, I'm going to turn towards self-soothing mechanisms that might lead to short-term gains, but long-term maladaptive issues. I might turn to nicotines and caffeines and alcohol and gambling and drugs and sex addictions and gaming addictions and work addictions. And the list goes on as I'm instinctively looking to gravitate towards something that takes away these symptoms or avoid things that make it worse.
And those negative go-tos that people normally do are easy. And some of these other things that we're discussing are not as easy. Changing your diet, doing something, but they're not hard either. Just changing your diet. Yeah, it takes a little bit more thought, but you could do it. I did it. What the hell? You could do it too. And the other thing I think that people need to realize is that as you get older, those things become more important. Not only do they become more important acutely, like the way you feel now, but when you're younger, if you start younger, as you get older, they're going to, and you correct me if I'm wrong, they're going to affect your health into your as you age, and your longevity and your longevity, because if you do these things, start out a little earlier, and we know about them a lot more now, you're going to live a longer, healthier life. At least that's my experience. Let's talk about stress for a minute, because we talked about hormonal imbalances, and we both know, for those of you out there that don't know, that when you go through a stressful situation, your hormones are just insane. You're swimming in a sea of cortisol, and your body is under attack. We all have heard of the fight or flight or now freeze syndrome, but that's really detrimental, not only to our emotional and mental health, but also our physical health. So can you tell me and tell everybody, what are some of the most common misconceptions people have about stress, that they need to be aware of and should address?
Yeah, well, two things come to mind. The first thing is that stress is not always a bad thing. It's actually a protective mechanism, right? Like the way our body actually reacts when in states of stress. We need that stress response. Right? We were designed to be able to vacillate between getting away from threats and being able to calm the system down. And if we were ever in a high performance situation and we had no stress, we wouldn't do really well. So the response of these hormones when under states of stress, of getting pupils to start to dilate to get more light, and breathing a little bit faster, and slowing down our digestion, and getting more muscle tones in little sprints and bursts, is a great, beautiful mechanism. The problem is that we weren't meant to be in that state every single day. So misconception one is that the stress response is inherently a negative thing, is not true. Misconception number two is that we should just be able to handle stress and put it behind us and push through it, because if we're not having breakdowns yet and we're not having obvious symptoms, we're perfectly fine. And it's a sign of weakness if we're actually working on it, when all the research is showing that stress doesn't always manifest in things that are so obvious. We can go through challenges in our life and our brain doesn't have a delete button, and we start interpreting all these different cues as being threatening behind the scenes. And these little changes of cortisol surges over time leads to all these metabolic issues down the road: immunosuppression, bone loss, higher risk of cancer, high sugar, heart disease, light sensitivities, migraines, bloatings, indigestions, malabsorptions, muscle tension, chronic inflammation. So stress doesn't always manifest in this classical thing called burnout. Sometimes it manifests in all these medical conditions. Why is our resting heart rate an extra 5 beats per minute? It's still in the normal range, but that extra 5 beats adds up when you think about how many minutes are in a day, and how hard it's actually working over the course of the many years of our lives. So if we can start to learn the science behind what is actually happening to us from the challenges that we go through in our lives, and we learn evidence-based exercises to rid our bodies of this stress, it's not a sign of weakness. It's just going to optimize our overall physical well-being. It's going to improve our reaction time. It's going to improve our social relationships, our ability to connect and form healthy bonds and coping mechanisms.
You're absolutely right. We've at the American Institute of Stress, we've known about that for a while. We produced a documentary called Mismatch, where we talk about the mismatch of us on an evolutionary scale. I mean, 10,000 years ago, you hit the nail right on the head. We were meant to go into stress, negative or positive, but if it was negative, you come down from it. The saber-toothed tiger leaves your village and you feel better. We're not built for modern day stress, where we're constantly bombarded by technologies that put you in stress all the time. And I'd love for you to talk about that a little bit. Every time, there were some days every email's stressful. every phone call, every text is like somebody. We're not really built for that. We have no coming down from that. It's not a 15-minute,
Yes. No, you're right. It's when you think about the way society was 30 years ago, where you'd go out to play with your friends and it was just call me, be home for dinner, and there was no way to get in contact, and your nervous system was to really be on pause and to be in the moment and to be socializing. A lot of healing processes are going on during that, because the brain is electrical. If you look at a brain when it's being utilized and you're thinking a lot and you put an EEG, there's a lot of rapid spikes, a lot of electrical patterns that are happening. Anything that's electrical that's being used all the time creates heat as a byproduct. It's why our phones overheat and get hot, and what happens is our apps don't work as well. So our brain needs time to cool down. And the benefit of reducing technology to some degrees is that it allowed us on a subconscious level to really know that it was safe to turn off. And I say that on a subconscious level because we could interview for a job and we could pretty certainly know that we got that job, but you're still going to sleep a lot better when you're told that you did get the job, because your brain really felt that it could finally turn off. So, now we've got our computer in our pockets and we've got Wi-Fi and we're getting text messages all the time and we're getting emails and we're expected to respond to those emails. We're looking at the news. It's right in our phone. You used to get a newspaper and you would read it. You have to wait for the next day to find out what was going on. Now we're seeing those same clips. We have access to it all the time. So this chronic brain always being in a state of high alert, what if states, you can imagine all the electrical activity, all the inflammation. And then what happens when we get a viral infection and we're inflamed? We don't feel so great. We're malaise, fatigue, brain fog, muscle aches. We're laying in bed. It's why we feel a little bit better when we take a Tylenol and that inflammation clears up. So this brain fog, this activation that's happening as a result of chronic stress is being exacerbated by technology. So the value of making rules around putting some of the technology away is in some ways equivalent to running a marathon and then making a rule that you're going to put your legs up on the couch when you're done. Otherwise, lactic acid's going to build and things are going to start to break down and you're going to start to not live as optimally. I mean, there's other things that are also happening on the screen times, the blue light exposure, disrupting sleep-wake cycles. We're not blinking as much when we're on a screen. That doesn't seem that much, but when your blink reflex goes down by half, you need to blink to coat your eyes with tears. And if you don't have that, light doesn't bend where it's supposed to go the right way. If it's not bending the right way, then the ocular muscles have to correct itself to get the light to go to the right places. And it leads to a lot of eye fatigue and eye strain and brain fog and headaches. It's being called computer vision syndrome now. And then the other thing is, a lot of the times we're getting used to looking at areas that are, very, very narrow. And if we're being exposed to that all the time and we're indoors a lot and we're always on a screen and we're not activating a lot of our peripheral reflexes, well, everything in the nervous system that is not being used that much gets weaker, and everything that's being used more gets stronger. It's why if you're blind, your hearing will get a little bit better. If you're deaf, your vision will get a little bit better. If you patch your right eye, that eye will get weaker and your other eye will get a little stronger. It's called neglect in neurology. So, what are we doing to our equilibrium when now all of a sudden we go outside and we're looking at big spatial open fields and all of a sudden people are getting a little disoriented and a little bit dizzy and they're feeling weaker and they're struggling on bridges and on chairlifts looking down. You pick up a phone and you feel a little bit more comfortable. So there's a lot of neurorehabilitation that starts happening when we're making rules around putting away some of the technology.
I think that's a great way to put it. And you should have a time where you put away the technology. I know I do. But I think the best advice I would say is have a good balance. Go for a walk in the park as much as you stare at a computer screen or play a sport. That'll help your peripheral vision and your focus and your attention, and it's cognitively as good for you as physically. So we talked about all these problems that we're having. We're bombarded by stress events, and we don't take care of ourselves physically as much as we should, and nutritionally as much as we should. We certainly, our circadian rhythms are so whacked. I hear that so many people, for those of you who don't, that's the rhythm that you sleep in. And it's so important to have that going right. I know people that, because of the stress in their life or not managing that stress, their sleep is just wacky, and it affects everything they do, which is a whole nother episode of this podcast. But all of those things, and of course, the fact that 75% of doctor visits can be attributed directly to the stress in your life. That's an incredible number. But what I wanted to ask you is, and we talked about this stuff, give me some advice. Tell everybody, what would you tell someone who's feeling right now, and there's a lot of people out there, we're coming to an election, there's all kinds of stuff going on in the world, they're feeling overwhelmed by stress. They may not put their finger on it and say, this is stressing me out. But they're unsure of where to start in regaining control of their mental health. Where would you start?
I think that we all know that working on slowing down the nervous system and taking breaks from the technology and engaging in mindfulness. You mentioned going for a walk. I would even add in, and during that walk, focusing on sensory and not all the different stressors of the future and work and bills and finances. A lot of times we take those stressors inside and we just take it with us when we go outside.
We take them for a walk.
And a lot of us know that there's a value to being able to do that. But the problem is that our brain is always firing away. It's always ruminating. And I always say that, one of the key components is we have to start becoming a little bit more comfortable with creating a little bit of a distance between ourselves and our thoughts. If we all try to close our eyes and go as long as we possibly could without having any thought enter our mind, we wouldn't be able to go very long, because the brain is electrical and it's always generating different ideas and thoughts. And it's not coming out of the blue, it's coming from our history, because the brain doesn't have a delete button. And just because our brain is generating content doesn't mean that it's necessarily true. And I always say that one of the things that sometimes we try to do is we start thinking about all of our worries and our bills, and we call them what if thoughts. What if this happens? And if I do this, then what if that's going to affect somebody else? And we start getting so much anxiety, and the body starts to actually react, in a negative way. And we're so keen on making the thought go away and dissipate that it almost distracts us from being able to do the things that we actually know are going to bring real meaning and value to our overall well-being. And investing in ourselves is going to help everybody else around us, because if we care so much about our family and our friends in the world, but we're deteriorating, we're not really able to contribute. It's the classic, you're on a plane, love your kids, mask is falling. Even though your instinct might be, I want to help my child, if something happens to you, child doesn't have a chance. You put the mask on yourself first, then the child. So, we have to learn how to put a little bit of a distance between ourselves and our thoughts, and not try to make all the thoughts go away. Somebody once said to me, I really need to go into therapy to get better control over my thoughts. And my response was, I think we should be going to therapy to get more comfortable with the fact that we're not in control of our thoughts and that the brain is always generating. And then Stephen Hayes, the founder of ACT Therapy, gave an amazing example that really resonated. And I think it's a great takeaway for everyone that's listening. But if you're driving a car and you've got a road in front of you, and that's the destination where you really know that you want to be going to, and you've got all this people in the back seat that are making so much noise, if we're so busy trying to make the noise go away or to make the noise stop or to get them out the car, we're not seeing where we're going at all, and we're never going to make it to the destination. It's about not having this harsh, I need to make them stop and I need to get it out of the car. Instead, it's becoming comfortable with the fact that our brain is generating remnants of our past and finding meaning and compassion for where that's coming from, and not fearing that, but learning to be able to tolerate it. Similar to when you have a fan that's on, if you always turn it off right away, you'll always hear that buzzing sound every time that fan turns back on. So finding the serenity of allowing it to be there and take it with you as you're focusing on the core values, the destination. And I think our core values has to be self-care. And I think part of self-care has to be understanding that taking moments of time for ourselves, although it might seem selfish and it might seem that there's all these other things that we need to start to prioritize, it will actually give us the strength to be able to do those things that much more.
You're absolutely right. Absolutely. I mean, your analogy, I've used it myself, always put the oxygen mask on yourself first, so is absolutely correct. And making time for yourself and getting comfortable with your own thoughts is a great way for a great takeaway for people. I think they needed to hear that. We have 70 to 90,000 thoughts a day, and I've heard that at least 75% of them are negative. Hey, cut it down 25%. See how much happier you'll be. So before we go, Andrew, I want to ask you one more question. I ask everybody this. It's very important. What do you do when you're stressed out? What is your go-to?
Yeah, well, I usually start off with doing what I just said before, which is actually reminding myself that even though my brain is generating all these different thoughts, I almost expect that that's going to happen because a lot of things are part of that algorithm. I need to be able to step away from it, focus on the things that I know my body really needs to heal, because life is a marathon. It's not a sprint, and we have to take care of our body. So it's not a one particular technique. It's more about making sure that I'm engaging in a technique and having variety, where I'm not only doing the same technique every single day. So I might make an effort to do breath work and then learn the science behind what breathing is actually doing. How is that stimulating the vagus nerve? What is happening to the diaphragm during exhales, and how that's creating a feedback loop that's going to slow down heart rate and release nitric oxide and lower my blood pressure. And during the breath work, I try to focus on the rhythm of the breath and getting my system into a rhythm, which is the mindfulness component of not focusing on all the different stressors of the world. Sometimes I'll do what's called a body scan, which is, we're sometimes in such fight or flight mode that it has no value to really understand how much pain our body is in. It's more beneficial to just think about logistics of how to survive. Do I make a left? Do I make a right? What do I do? And there's disconnect between the brain and the body from chronic stress. And how do I take time to reconnect those two together? How do I take time to start paying attention to the body again? Starting to recognize that I've got something called eyes. It's tired. I want to close my eyes. It's hard to smile. I've got a neck with tension and pain. Through that, through the back, arthritis in the fingertips, knots in the stomach. I'm holding my breath. And I sit there and I realize how much neglect that there's been towards myself and my body, focusing up here on all the problems. And sometimes taking the time to notice that inspires me to know that I should be working on this more. It's the same thing with if I notice that I've got weakness in muscles, I'm going to probably have a better chance of wanting to go to the gym versus if I feel that there's no need for it at all in the first place. So that's another classical one that I'll do. But beyond breathing, there's tapping, there's qigong meditation, there's trauma releasing exercises, there's different styles of yoga. All of these things have a different value, a different purpose. They're working on a different circuit. There's therapeutics to going for a swim and being in rhythm, moving the spine, playing tennis on a tennis court. So, it's just about picking something and saying, I want to do something for the nervous system, but I'm not only going to do one thing every single day for the rest of my life. And I'm going to remind myself the value of doing this, even a little bit, that it's going to help a lot. And that's why we say we need a gym for the brain. We call these gym modalities STAR exercises: stress, trauma, active release, and rewiring. And if anybody's interested, samehereglobal.org, you can click on the STAR network and you can learn about all these different STAR exercises. There's a lot of resources there. There's even a STAR course that people take where all these inventors of different modalities have come together through Maryland to bring these resources. But the takeaway is just starting something, being mindful of it.
That's a great answer. And I think what the best takeaway from this conversation is you should have a toolbox that you can reach into to help you deal with the stress you're experiencing. I'm a big believer in breath work because you always got it with you. I can't always lay down and do a yoga stretch or go to the gym, but I can always breathe. So learning how to do these things, I'm going to put the link so you guys can write it down and follow it. And my suggestion is you go to Same Here Global and you look through their website and you find out what you can put in your toolbox to help you manage your stress. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today. I think we learned a lot from you today. I wish we could have this conversation a lot longer, but obviously we can't. But I do want to remind everybody that's listening, go to the webinar and see a much more comprehensive view of what we talked about today. So that's going to do it for us today. I want to thank you all for joining us and Finding Contentment. This has been your host. I'm Will Heckman. I want you to visit us at stress.org. And I want to remind everybody, just as stress is different for each of us, there is no one stress reduction or management strategy that's right for everyone. So that means you need to join us next time as we explore more stress management strategies and insights. That's going to do it for us today. See you next time.